Okay. So that means I think we can fairly easily, I guess, agree what 2 and 1 is. I guess I'll say what I have at number 1 because we're down to 2. The Suicide Squad is my number 1 DCEU movie.
I knew you'd say that.
Are you Wonder Woman?
I'm Wonder Woman.
We're gonna have to debate this. The 2 and 1. Wow, go for it.
The Suicide Squad is great. It's a good movie. When you rewatch it, I think it's still good. Good performances all around. I like the funny comedic performances with the violent and goriness of it. Peacemaker, still my number one MVP out of that movie. I think Starro is a cool looking villain, but not a great villain. I think it does have a true Suicide Squad feel to it, and it has a dark story comic book at heart. But at the end of the day, like, it's just, for me, when I look at Wonder Woman, much more influential, basically saved the DCEU, had an emotional punch with Steve Trevor, Chris Pine. Like, I think we're forgetting, like, people were like, Wonder Woman, like, first, like, pretty much successful. Like, this is the one thing that the DCEU had over the MCU. It had a woman-led superhero movie that was successful. And looking back at this movie, like, had some themes that were very important. Looking at mankind, war, innocence, and World War One movie. The scene when you're going on no man's land, iconic. Yes, as a familiar formula and familiar superhero beats to a movie, but still in a clever, in a good setting, war setting that made it feel real. Good side character, almost driving the main character in Chris Pine, and it was still creative with Paradise Island and everything that's coming to be. Yes, it has its faults, but at the end of the day, I think it's the most important DCEU movie, and why it's my number one.
I agree it's the most important DC movie. I still don't think it's the best compared to the Suicide Squad. I do think it was necessary for this movie to land. Following, obviously, Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, after this movie came out, I remember we were still getting magazines. I'd read over our grandparents' house. It was like Entertainment Weekly and IGN magazine. It was like listing the most important superheroes in movies today. And Wonder Woman was number 1 on those lists after 2017. That's how important this movie was. And it crushed at the box office, $800 million.
Crazy.
And Gal Gadot is clearly her best performance as Wonder Woman. You know, I don't think she was asked to do too much. She really pulled off the look of the character, the physicality, and it has moments. The No Man's Land scene is one of the greatest scenes. It might be the greatest scene in the history of the DCEU, you know, most significant in the DCEU. But I will argue for the Suicide Squad. It came out 2021. So this is 4 years after Wonder Woman. And this is also a lot of turmoil going on in the DC universe. When you talk about like the idea of a standalone movie or something that doesn't feel too embedded in a universe and just feels like it's a good movie that stands on its own, that's what the Suicide Squad was. And it took someone like James Gunn who really understands comic books and understands the concept of the Suicide Squad to make this movie successful. Like when he's like cutting out, he's killing characters in the first 10 minutes of the movie, you're like, hell yeah, this is what we expected from the Suicide Squad. Right? He's ruthless. And there's also like these these meta jokes about the previous Suicide Squad that I found intensely funny because everyone likes to rip on those movies, right? But in terms of the comedy, I think it mostly hits. Some of the comedy is almost like Guardians 2-esque, where it's like cringy at times. But I think a lot of it hits. Like, dude, one of my favorite scenes, like talk about No Man's Land, one of my other favorite scenes in the DC Extended Universe is where you have Bloodsport and Peacemaker going 1-for-1 in the campground with kills.
Really good scene.
That is incredible and has an incredible punchline. It's like an action scene that ends with a punchline. It was incredible. It was fantastic. And you talk about Peacemaker, John Cena, built for the role. I think Bloodsport, amazing in the movie as well. You know, I thought this, like David Dastmalchian, great. And by the way, Margot Robbie is in this movie. Like Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. Like it just seems like this ensemble it was firing on all cylinders. And I agree, the villain sucks, right? Like it's just it doesn't really operate in a way where it's like the villain you think of in a superhero movie, where it's like someone that's a dominant force. But I think I can't argue that Wonder Woman has that either. You know, I think Wonder Woman has a pretty not a very compelling villain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it was some sort of villain was with us throughout the movie that kind of kept us aware. And yes, it's World War One, so but it had like that Captain America First Avenger like kind of villain throughout, but then threw us in a CGI battle at the end, which I think when I saw it in theaters, it worked for me. Looking back on it, it's like crap. That's a superhero trope in the 21st century that we hate. So yes, and it was so obvious. Like we first time you see it, you knew that was going to happen. So yes, I think that's also a flaw of this movie. I'll just say with the comedy, I agree with you in the Suicide Squad. Yes, of course, the funnier movie. It's a James Gunn, and you have all these comedic characters or actors around it, or people that can pull off these this comedy. But yet not everything lands. Versus a Wonder Woman, where that's more of a drama, but it's also funny with like the innocence and naivety, how naive Wonder Woman is. It works so well. Like it
Yeah,
does.
charming. It's charming. It's way
Yeah.
more charming, especially with the R-rated type of comedy that's in the Suicide Squad. And I will agree with you here. Well, this is a DCEU movie list.
Mhm.
The Suicide Squad kind of makes fun of the DCEU.
Yes. Yes.
So how are we gonna have a DCEU movie that makes fun of itself at number one? That would kind of be natural based on how we interpret the DCEU. But the highlight of the DCEU was Wonder Woman, so I'm willing to concede.
Thank you. That can I also say something about the Suicide Squad we haven't mentioned?
I
Ratcatcher 2. People
Yeah,
forget that like kind of the emotional heart of that movie. People forget. We haven't mentioned Daniela Melchior. Very good in that. And Taika was also in that. Shout out Taika.
yeah, the ensemble just worked. And James Gunn said this is the most fun he ever worked on a movie set and said a lot after like the experiences he had with Guardians of the Galaxy. And James Gunn in that interview I was talking about earlier, he said there's no plans for a Suicide Squad sequel.
Yet.
I don't know if it's ever going to happen, man. If it's not
Yeah.
in the phase, this chapter 1, Gods and Monsters for DC, I don't think it's in the bag.
Yeah.
And especially with the Waller TV show coming, and then Peacemaker, that's like your sequel, your
But
quasi sequel, which the
right.
DCEU is so fond of.
But would you be surprised to see any of the people in the Suicide Squad that are still alive in those two projects?
I can see Idris Elba because Idris Elba can
He's
show up
too
out of
good.
nowhere, man. And like what if he was like going one on one against Peacemaker in season 2? Who
Like
says
that.
no?
That'd be a big one. Like Red Dragon was a good villain, but not Idris Elba. Bloodsport, what he would be. Like I was mentioning the Extraction review, how like if somehow in the third or fourth Extraction, Idris Elba he turns bad, and or Chris Hemsworth has to destroy Idris Elba and his boss, and basically Idris Elba's the villain. That would be awesome. Chris Hemsworth versus Idris Elba. John Cena, Peacemaker versus Idris Elba. We get that again. That would be awesome for a whole season. That'd
That'd
be
be
like
crazy.
it would like have the boys vibes.
James Gunn's hands on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be like Jensen Ackles, Soldier Boy versus like Homelander almost. Obviously not the supernatural powers. I would love that.
And James Gunn has said that he's going to continue. He's going to go right into production on season 2 of Peacemaker right after he's done with Superman Legacy. So he has not forgotten Peacemaker, and I think audiences are really looking forward to the next theme song for season 2.
He's busy. James Gunn is busy.